Frederick Buechner is a well-known Presbyterian minister, and he has written a pile of books. And in his long career, he's given a lot of interviews. He was once interviewed on PBS, and in the course of this, the conversation turned, as you might expect, to this question of suffering. Because the reporter really wanted to know what Buechner had to say about that. How could he explain it? How could he justify the ways of God, so to speak? And Buechner is a very wise man. He's well into his 80s, and he has seen a lot. And so he didn't try to explain it away. He didn't try to give those little pithy sound bites, because he's lived through some pretty painful things in his life, and he knows that those things just don't cut it. When he was a child of 6, his father committed suicide. When he was an adult, his teenage daughter nearly died of anorexia. He knows what it's like to suffer. And this is what he said in that interview. Suffering plays a role in every life. We've all known our dark times. We've all felt abandoned by God, or felt there was no such thing as God to abandon us. Just the emptiness, the craziness of the world. And out of this, faith can often come. In my own life, I've never gone through a dark time without eventually somewhere finding a treasure in it. Maybe luck, maybe grace, maybe who knows what. I can hardly imagine anybody not going through a Good Friday one way or another. Going through the darkness one way or the other. I can't. In fact, I would be a little bit leery of anybody who felt that he or she had somehow come straight to a kind of faith having had no suffering at all. I think, well, you don't really know what life is all about. You don't know what faith is all about if all you know is little goody two-shoes kind of version of reality. Well, Jesus dealt in reality. He certainly wasn't in some sort of goody two-shoes version of it. Jesus got up close and personal with grief and with pain and with suffering and with sorrow, with degradation, with tears. The very Son of God, through whom all things were made, suffered death just like one of us. That is amazing. Can you wrap your head around it? And his suffering and his death had meaning. It wasn't random. It wasn't meaningless. It pointed to something. It pointed beyond itself to something that we scarcely can take in. We can barely begin to understand. Hebrews 2:9 in the New Revised Standard Version says that Jesus was made for a little while just a little lower than the angels, but is now crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. William Barclay, in his commentary on Hebrews, says that Jesus drained the cup of death for all people. Pretty graphic. In The Message, a new paraphrase of the scripture, we read, "What we do see is Jesus made not quite as high as the angels, and then, through the experience of death, crowned so much higher than any angel, with a glory bright with dawn light. In that death by God's grace, he fully experienced death in every person's place." For you, for me, for everybody. Because Jesus identified so closely with us, right down to his own suffering and death, he's able to do for us what we could never do for ourselves. By his suffering and by his glory, Christ can make us what we were originally intended to be, and what without him we could and cannot ever be. Created just a little lower than the angels, human beings were originally given authority and jurisdiction over everything. But in our sinful rejection of God, we experience the consequences of Adam and Eve and their choices. We do not yet see everything under our control, but what we do see is Jesus. both human and divine. Jesus, who willingly made himself lower than the angels and now is crowned with honor and glory as he leads his people to glory. Wow, does that make sense? Is that an answer to the question of suffering? Does that neatly wrap it up and put it on a shelf and we've got all the answers now? Well, no, of course not. That doesn't answer it a bit more than the book of Job did to those questions of why and why me. But what it does do is to give us a sense of hope. It gives us a focus beyond our own personal list of woes, and we all have them. That old hymn says, "I'm a poor wayfaring stranger while traveling through this world of woe." And that may be true. But we just sang a song by the greatest hymn writer of the Methodist movement that says, "Made like him we rise. Ours the cross, the grave, the skies." There's more to it than just this. This isn't all there is. That cup of death that Jesus drained to the very last drop for all of us has become the cup of salvation. It has become the means by which we gain real, true, everlasting life. And we share that every time we come to the table of the Lord together. This world with its burdens and its sorrows and its griefs is not all there is. And that is very, very good news. In the midst of all life's tragedies, great and small, there is God's grace poured out abundantly, our cup overflowing with it. It didn't get much better than that. That's the treasure that Buechner was talking about finding in his dark times. That is the treasure that we find, that grace of God that comes to us though we don't deserve it, we can't earn it, and we can't buy it. It's God's free gift to us. No matter what we face, God is with us. No matter where we go and what happens in our lives, God is with us. In the words of one of our confessions of faith in our hymnal, in life, in death, and life beyond death, God is with us. The friend that I mentioned at the beginning of this sermon shared a poem with me in the days following his wife's death, and it gave him a lot of comfort in those painful days. And I've shared it with a lot of people along the way. And I want to share it with you as a closing thought. I said, "God, it hurts." And God said, "I know." I said, "God, I cry a lot." And God said, "That's why I gave you tears." I said, "God, I get so depressed." And God said, "That's why I gave you sunshine." I said, "God, I feel alone." And God said, "That's why I gave you loved ones." I said, "God, my loved one is dead." And God said, "I watched mine nailed to the cross." I said, "God, where are they?" And God said, "Mine is on my right and yours is in the light." I said, "God, it hurts." And God said,